in the foyer. Assembly in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? And that's a no, so we move on. Are any members wishing to speak under 20.1 this evening? And that's a no as well. I don't have any requests for public speaking. There's no members of the public here, so we move on to the main agenda. So apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Lees, who's subbed by Councillor Townend, Councillor Rattigan, Councillor Piper, Stuart Piper, and Councillor Moore, who's subbed by Councillor Yates. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Boyd.
Hi, Chair. I would like to declare that I have an annual resident parking permit which will come under fees and charges, so that's my declaration of interest.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. That's noted. Thank you, Councillor Ring. Minutes of the previous meeting. We need to approve the minutes of the... Okay, the minutes of the previous meeting held on October 24th, 22. A copy has been circulated. Can I have a proposer, please? Proposed by Councillor Moore and a seconder, and seconded by Councillor Tomlinson. Do all members agree? Thank you. Moving on to item 4, we're going to have a Cabinet member presentation on the efficacy, I've just been practicing that word in my head, of using CAG's approach in policy development and decision making. So I'm going to call upon our leader to make that presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation, OSP Committee. It's not a visual presentation, it's a verbal presentation, so I thought that would be far more interesting than looking at a lot of pictures. So as you're probably aware, we currently have 4 Cabinet Advisory Groups, commonly known as CAGs, which are the Climate Change, Housing, Local Plan and Local Development Scheme, Fees and Charges. These CAGs are made up of a small group of cross-party councillors commissioned by myself as the leader to look at particular issues of concern or interest in those areas. They are most often, and in this case for Thanet District Council during this administration, chaired by the Cabinet members that are responsible for the areas of that work that is being looked at. So for instance, the local plan I chair because that comes under my portfolio. The climate change is chaired by Councillor Bob Bayford, that's his area of concern under this portfolio. Housing for Councillor Jill Bayford, fees and charges, as is most topical for this evening, by Councillor David Saunders. The role of the CAG is to advise the Cabinet on issues under the remit of the CAG, so current matters of climate change, housing, local plan, fees and charges. The CAG will often meet in private, and this has in some quarters drawn some criticism and accusations of lack of transparency. But I think it's important to clarify the reason that the CAGs need to be in a safe place for the frank exchange of ideas without the fear of those people watching of getting the wrong end of the stick or selectively taking ideas out of context. If all CAGs were in public, then there certainly would be times when ideas were not discussed as they could be presented as facts rather than purely ideas. It is an ideas and fact-sharing group of people, group of councillors. Further to that point, it is not the case the CAGs making decisions on policy behind closed doors and away from scrutiny by other councils and the public. It is not the role of the CAG to make a decision, and I emphasise that they aren't it is not a decision-making body. A CAG does not make decisions, and there are no votes. It is purely, as I say, a way of sharing information cross-party, inwardly and outwardly on the subject, the defined subjects of the 4 items that are referred to. In fact, using the previous example of the net zero strategy, the strategy was developed by officers using the climate change CAG as a sounding board. And then the final draft strategy was brought to this scrutiny panel for review before eventually going to Cabinet for approval. Other commonly misheld perception is that CAGs are being used as an alternative to scrutiny reviews. I can see why some members might, or people might actually have come to that conclusion, but I do not believe this is the case. A scrutiny review is a specific piece of work that is time limited and takes a specific question to which the review would find the answer to. For example, the panel last year did a review on coastal waste and is currently undertaking a review covering the relationship between town and parish councils and the district. The work of the CAG is entirely different in that a CAG has an ongoing role in advising Cabinet on ongoing issues. This type of work would not be appropriate for a scrutiny review, and it would not score well on the panel scrutiny review criteria. So far, CAGs have contributed to a wide range of policies, strategies and other works. These include net zero strategy, the revised local plan, the housing estate strategy, the carbon reduction plan and the housing assisted scheme, amongst others. That represents a very significant body of work that CAGs have worked on. And do I think that there's been successful and worthwhile use of both officers' and members' time? Yes, I do. So whilst the work can be seen as similar to CAGs and scrutiny, they do perform very different roles. So that hopefully explains my interpretation and the interpretation of the distinct difference between the CAG function and obviously the very important function of overview and scrutiny. So thank you, Chair, and I'm obviously open to any questions the panel might have for me.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. So do members have any questions to ask or comments to make to our Leader? Oh, hands up. Councillor Huxley.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Leader. Just a comment, really. I'm on the housing and climate change CAGs, and I found them really, really positive. Really, really positive. I don't think we should change it. I think it's really, we had some really good outcomes from it. It's helped with my casework because I've got some good detailed knowledge of what's going on. We've had an honest discussion with the officers and with other members of the two CAGs that I'm on, and it's been really positive and useful, and so I think we should keep it as it is. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Huxley. Councillor Wing.
I'd echo the words of Councillor Huxley. I'd just add that they've been really useful. I'm on the housing one, so there's been really good at sharing ideas and concerns that we have in our wards that maybe we can put more emphasis on, and I would not want to see them changed. But the only addition I would have is perhaps allowing some of our independent councillors the chance to be on the board. I know Councillor Ruth Bailey was really disappointed to not be on the housing CAG once the leadership of the council changed, and I think we lost a lot by not having her on there. So that's the only issue I'd have, is can we give our independent councillors the same chance to be on these CAGs given they're not decision making?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wing. Any more questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Bundle.
Nipped in there ahead of Councillor Kerry Boyd. I just want to add from an officer's perspective, I think given the system of governance that we've got in place at the council with a cabinet model, and that we've got quite a large number of councillors for the size of the council we've got, the CAGs provide a real opportunity for those that are outside either cabinet or shadow cabinet to have an input into decision making. If we were under a different model of governance, say under a committee model, then you could make an argument that a CAG, well, you wouldn't have a cabinet, but you wouldn't need that sort of governance structure in place. So I think given the size of the number of councillors we've got and the governance model that we've got with a cabinet and a strong leader system, means that we really benefit in terms of getting that cross-party input into our decision making from having those cabinet advisory groups set up.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. I currently sit on 2 cabinet advisory groups and absolutely love them, so it gives me a really good opportunity to get involved. And a couple of years ago, I was on the health and wellbeing one, and I know this came up in a meeting possibly 6 to 12 months ago about it possibly coming back. So I just wondered whether health and wellbeing or something around community safety. We've got 4 cabinet advisory groups which sit in the cabinet members, but community safety or young people or something around that isn't necessarily accounted for in the cabinet advisory groups. So I just wondered whether there was an option for that moving forward in the new term.
Did you want to come back?
I mean, I need to look back and to discover why that was dropped from the actual CAG. I think it was because we already have 4. Now, obviously, we have to be, there has to be an officer present at the CAGs as well, so it might be to do with resource. But I'll have to check back through the records on that. I'll have to refer to Nick, and we'll have to look back through there. But obviously, councillors attending, it's up to us to make up the proportionality, and the difficulty is there in answering to some degree Councillor Wing's question, or Councillor Austin, I can't remember which way round it was now, regarding the independence. The problem there is when you have proportionality, then it's you pick from your group. The trouble is when we have independents, who goes on where and who is it fair to just select one independent member as opposed to another? It would be a difficult call into asking who to go on what. I mean, presumably if each independent councillor, if we have 4 groups and we have 4 independent councillors, then and they all willing to sit on each one, then that would come across as fair. But it's just a difficult call when they are pure independents, and to say, well, you can come on this one, but you can't come on that one. I'm just wondering about the logistics, if it were. But I mean, certainly something that can be looked at. And I'll come back to you, Councillor Boyd, on the health and wellbeing. To be honest, I can't remember. It would have been. It is the gift of the leader, basically, and it's. I think when I first took control of the council, I looked through it, and I had to obviously decide the areas that were generating the majority of the work and the background. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of background that goes on, especially on the local plan itself, because the legislation is moving, as we know, and the local plan moves from different stages. So, and with the climate change, that's moving all the time. There's a heavy workload on the housing, and obviously fees and charges is particularly prevalent this time of the year. So, the workloads do vary, but I'll certainly have a look at that. But it might be to do with officer resource, or it might be that I had to basically fit it into the calendar, etc. But I'll come back to you on that as soon as I find out.
Thank you. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up really on what Chris was saying about constitutional models, and I wondered, Leader, whether, I know at the very beginning of this council there was some discussion about whether the council should explore a committee system and talk to other councils that were adopting that. Do you feel that this model, using the CAGs but still having the cabinet system, is getting the council the best benefit out of the combined expertise and ideas of councillors?
Absolutely. I've studied other councils that have committee systems. I have a good relationship with the leader of Canterbury City Council, who have just gone back to a cabinet system. The problem is with committees, and it seems to be pretty standard across for all committee-led councils, is that it gives an opportunity for things to move around a lot, but not decisions being made. At least with a strong cabinet, you move things forward. And as I can witness, or you've witnessed, and being leader of this council, if we'd have been under a committee system, I can assure you we wouldn't have moved this council on like we have in the last 18 months, 20 months. Because what we've actually done in this council over the last of that 20 months to sort out the issues that we had here, they certainly wouldn't have been under a committee system. I know committee systems are favoured by groups that don't necessarily hold majority of council, and I can understand that. But if you want a fast-moving, decision-making, good process, then you don't want to give anywhere for either members or officers to actually hide. And I think, and forgive me, officers, if I'm talking out of turn here, but you know, a committee system, I think, is probably easier for the officers to work with if they don't want to move things forward in such a progressive manner. And I think the way we've got this model set up here is absolutely ideal, and I think we've really demonstrated with our officers that we've come through quite a lot of adversity because we have this system. So I think the CAGs are absolutely essential to support a strong cabinet structure system, and I mean, obviously turkeys don't vote for Christmas, so, but even if I wasn't the leader of this council, I would still endorse working within a council that has a cabinet, because I can see both sides of the coin, and it is certainly more effective.
Thank you.
Councillor King.
Thank you, and thank you, Leader. I mean, I actually wanted to support what Councillor Boyd said, because I think it's something really important and something that we're missing, challenging in this council, that we already know many parts of Thanet have significant health problems, and although it's not a direct council role, there's lots we can do that would improve community health, and the same with community safety, which also impacts on health. So personally, I would just like to see that happen. So thank you for your suggestion, Councillor Boyd.
If I could just, I mean, I have absolutely no problem of forming it. Obviously, it would only be formed for a very short period, and I'm not sure the effectiveness of it. I mean, it would be formed in February, March, and April, and then again, it is the gift of the leader to decide. So we could form it and have it sitting for a couple of 3 months, so that at least they could get maybe terms of reference together, and then it's up to whoever that may be in May to whether they want to carry it on, and indeed the other CAGs as well. So with Nick, if Nick's going to nod at me, whether we could just get that together, maybe just a small committee, a small CAG, as opposed to a medium-sized mini-cab. Oh, that's it. I don't mention mini-cabs.
Sounds like Penny's
so,
area, doesn't it?
Nick, I don't know, would it be something we could do for 3 months and then try and set a precedent going forward, or how do you feel about that?
There's no reason why you couldn't, but I'd look at Chris with a big star that said resource. That would be my only reservation on that front. But yeah, from a purely constitutional point of view, then yeah, we could do that. But I'd just caveat that with a healthy dose of we'd need some resource to do that.
Okay, well, if we can take that away and have a discussion, maybe, I don't mind putting some time towards the terms of reference, and we don't necessarily need an officer to attend at the meeting, but certainly would need an officer just to help with the terms of reference. So, and just fitting it into the I think it has to go into the Constitution, and it obviously has to be added into websites, etc. So, well, we'll explore it anyway. If it's not a massive amount of work, we could set the concept in motion anyway. Okay.
Any more comments or questions for the leader? Okay, that's a note. So I'd like to thank the leader for coming to the meeting and giving her presentation. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. I don't mind leaving my open fire and my warm slippers behind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, moving on the agenda to item number 5, which is fees and charges for 2023 to 2024. So I'll call on Chris Blundell to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report went to Cabinet last week on Thursday, sets out the proposed fees and charges for the forthcoming financial year. They're set out in detail within the annex to the report that sets out both the cash increase and the percentage increase. We've aimed for a broad 10% increase in fees and charges, across all the services that we charge for, wherever possible, wherever practically possible, to do so, largely linked to the high inflation environment that we're operating in order to recover the costs where that's the purpose of the charge. Obviously, some fees and charges are not set just for cost recovery. There can be other purposes for them, be that to influence residents or customer behaviour, to limit or ration the availability of a particular service. So I don't intend to go through the fees and charges annex in detail, because obviously there's a lot in there to digest. In terms of coming back from some of the questions that were raised at Cabinet on Thursday, I think the main point of interest was around fees and charges for car parking. We have looked to try and produce some additional information. Unfortunately, we've not been able to get it all out of the system. We have had some system issues with over the last day or so. But what I can sort of tell members in terms of the position on car parking, I believe it was Councillor Everett that raised the point around the fact that the majority of car parking income, in terms of the presentation and the annex, it looked like it was just an increase in the budget for the Mill Lane car park. What I've been provided with for or by my team is a breakdown of the income that's been achieved from Mill Lane, Royal Harbour, and then the other heading is just the grouping of all other car parks under a general heading. The budget set out for the for the current financial year there's £100,000 for Mill Lane, 178,000 for Royal Harbour, and then it's 1.367 million for all the others put together. If I just start with Mill Lane, the £100,000 budget, in terms of the amount of income either estimated for the current financial year, because we've not finished it yet, or what we've actually received in the last couple of financial years. So looking at Mill Lane, we're actually forecasting to receive income closer to 300,000 there. That's the figure that we received in 21-22. It was £299,971 to be precise, and 25 pence. So you see there's quite a lot of room over above the budget there. Even going back to 2021, where we're in the pandemic, we still got £75,000 worth of income. I think a lot of that was actually in relation to staff permits that are recharged and the cost of those allocated to the income that's earned from the car park. A bit of wooden dollar accounting recharging there, but it still represents the value of the spaces that are being used. So the reason why it's been shown the 95 increase is pretty much to realign the budget that we've got there on Mill Lane, because we've only got a £95,000 budget, but we're significantly overachieving on that. If you look at the Royal Harbour budget, well, you can't look at it, sorry. If I can explain the Royal Harbour budget to you, my apologies. 178,000 there. In terms of the income that's been received, it was 214,000 last year, and we're expecting it to be 190,000 for the current financial year. So that's closer. So there's not necessarily a need to alter that budget. The reason that we're not altering the budgets across the other car parks is because those are the ones that are down at the moment. So it talks about a 1.3 million, well 1.4 almost rounding up, million budget there. So it's £1,367,000 budget. That's the combination of all the other general car parks. We got in just under £1 million last year, so we're almost £250,000 down on those car parks. And the other car parks this year, we're looking at being forecast 1.029, so £1,029,000. So we're still considerably down there on the budget. So that's really trying to explain the presentation of the figures. I think there was a question as to why are we only increasing the budget at Mill Lane. It's just because the way those budgets are profiled. If I can put my hand in the air, I think the budgets have just been profiled incorrectly in the past, and this is just realigning them to get to a more accurate representation of the budgets for the forthcoming financial year. In terms of the overall increase in parking charges, we have presented a 10% increase. Appreciate this is not an easy decision to approve, given that many of residents and our customers, because lots of people who use the car parks aren't just residents. We have a number of visitors to the district, particularly in the summer months, who use our car parks, will be feeling the effects of the cost of living crisis. There's lots of regulation in place around car parking charges. We've been picked up on it by the auditors in the past in terms of when we tried to introduce new car parking schemes. You can't do that just to generate income. If we were to introduce a charge that say we want to do this to make money, we'd be in big trouble. Equally, we can't increase car parking charges to close a gap in the budget because that's not allowed. The reason you set and amend car parking charges is to manage traffic flow. That's got to be the primary purpose of it. So the reason we look to increase fees and charges for car parking this year is because we are in a high inflation environment and we wanted to ensure the impact of those car parking charges weren't diluted, because effectively as inflation goes up, if you don't increase your charges, they're becoming cheaper in real terms. So that's the principle, that's the sort of rationale behind the increase. I did explain that the 10% increase does produce an additional income, as you would expect, all other things being equal, assuming that demand doesn't decrease. The way we view that from an accounting perspective, given the regulatory framework, is that's a very welcome byproduct. That's probably the best way I can frame it, particularly if I was trying to explain our strategy and position with the auditors, because they would be looking at this. So we welcome the fact that it would generate additional income for us, but that's not the primary concern when we're setting them. The primary concern is around what we think fees and charges will do in terms of managing traffic flow. That was the main sort of point that was raised, so I just wanted to set that out at the outset, but I'm happy to take any further questions on car parking or any other items that are listed in the fees and charges reports.
Thank you, Chris. Before I open it to everybody, Councillor Boyd and Councillor Ringovex declared an interest, so no, if you want to make your comments first, and then you can leave. So before the open discussion, yeah. Nick will.
Yeah. So just to make clear, so two members have declared an interest. Normally they would leave for the discussion of the item and the vote, but because OSP has public speaking rights, there is and it's explained in the Declaration of Interest advice in the agenda, that both members are allowed to speak and contribute at the start of this item to make your point, as long as you don't cover the bits that you're declaring an interest in, obviously. And then after you've made your points, that's when you'd leave at the end and then come back afterwards. Okay?
Nick, sorry, if I just, because obviously fees and charges is a very wide remit and we're not just talking about car parking. Is it possible to segment the item so that we could discuss car parking and then allow the councillors the opportunity to come back in if they wanted to contribute to any of the other items in the reports? Sorry, yeah, curveball, but I thought it might be worth asking.
I don't think we can.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
I'm sorry. That's why, but you can make all your points at the beginning of the discussion, so you're not, and then you have to leave, yeah.
So Councillor Boyd first.
I will say something because I spent hours reading this last night, so I think I was like, oh, just dizzy. I really don't have too much to say apart from there was something that looked odd, and I don't know if it's a typo 3 times, that I just want to make sure is correct. So Joss Bay over 5 hours is an increase of 990.91%, which is a lot more than 10%. And if you're going to charge someone £54 to stay there 5 hours, they might have something to say about that. So that is Joss Bay Broadstairs, and there's also the same mistake, or if it is a mistake, who knows, it's St Mildred's Bay in Westgate, again the same, I think it's just a typo where it's meant to be £6, but they put 60, so it looks like it's gone up by 990%, and that's on page 30. of the report. So if you can have a look at that, because I don't know if that adds anything to your overall calculations. And then another one, which was allotments water on page 47, water charge per 25 square metres is up 273.83%, which seems quite a lot. But again, I'm not an expert on water or allotments or car parks. But I thought I'd raise them just in case, because they just looked a bit weird. That was all.
Nick, is now the right time for me to answer that? Is that permitted? Thank you.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you for your eagle-eyed and observations and obviously the hours you've spent looking at this. I concur. I obviously would need to confirm, but Penny can confirm that is obviously. I think someone's just hit the wrong button when they've entered it into the spreadsheet. It doesn't have any impact on the budget because we've obviously looked at income for car parks overall. But we obviously need to correct that because we don't want to approve that fees and charge and then have to come back to you to get it revised downwards. So thank you for your contribution. Allotments, I need to look at that. I'm not sure, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Wing, it's your turn.
Thank you. I just had it, and it was to do with the multi-storey car park, the Royal Harbour car park in. It's got nothing to do with me because I don't particularly use that, but. I welcome the fact that we're going to eventually buy it because that's clearly in there. And what I was asking in addition is, it's 3 million, I think, is the purchase price. Is that true in there? But does that include refurbishment? Because we know we still haven't got a lift and it's a pretty tatty car park.
So that's set out in the following item in the budget report. So I'm happy to cover it off at that point in time. Just to that's cleaner at that point. I'm happy with that, Nick. Yeah, and Chair.
I think Councillor Wing. Oh, I'd wear with a hand. Sorry. Comments and questions, members? It's just Councillor Yateson.
Thank you, Chair. So the Labour Group is unhappy with the 10% parking proposals and its impact on local residents. We do, however, recognise the need for budget adjustments if we are to make changes. As the Cabinet budget was only last Thursday, we do need a bit more time to consider the options, and that's options as a group, before we make any proposals. So at this time, we're not making any proposals to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Councillor King.
Thank you. This is not about car parking. I'd just like to comment on the bulky waste and green garden waste charges. Now, I don't disagree with them, but I'm just interested to make sure that they actually work as it's intended. Like it says, it's expected that the bulky waste charges will actually help to reduce fly tipping, which is a particular problem in some parts of our area. And will this be monitored to make sure that it does actually do that? I'm not sure how good our monitoring is of fly tipping occurrences anyway, because I was looking at the charges and then I was thinking one of the problems we often have is when a flat is come to the end of the lease, tenants have moved out or left or what have you, and then the entire flat is just dumped somewhere, and that's a lot of items, and that actually might have been cheaper. I mean, I know often it is just dumped, but it might have been cheaper under the 5 items collection than 5 individual items now. So I would hate to see something come in that actually put people off from using it. So I would put in a request for that to be monitored for its impact. Equally with the green garden waste, which I think is an excellent scheme, and I think it's quite fair enough for the cost to go up, but we want to encourage people to use the green garden waste system. So again, it would be interesting to see the figures about whether some people then opted out of it, particularly as I know some residents had problems with the green waste collection this year, so they might choose that they're not going to invest in it this year anyway. So it's just about monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up on car parking just from the point of view that obviously as a Green group we don't want to encourage people to use private cars where there are other alternatives available. Our difficulty is that we would have to have a decent public transport system and walking and cycling friendly towns, and we're struggling a bit with that in terms of the relationship that we have with KCC and the difficulty of actually getting them to listen to local information about what's needed. So we can sympathise with the Labour group's concerns there. What I want to know really from Chris was, do we think that putting charges up by a similar rate to inflation will actually have any effect on customer demand or not? And then picking up on Councillor Key's question, I also have a question for Penny, if she doesn't mind, which is about bulky waste. We had Safer Streets projects, which was supposed to have some kind of free bulky waste collection as part of them. Has that happened? Have we got any information on that? Do we know anything about that? It just seemed like a really good idea from the point of view that we could monitor the impact of that on fly tipping in the area, but I don't know whether we've actually got any intelligence on that.
If I just come in quickly on that one, I don't know the answer. I didn't prepare for that question on this meeting. Sorry, I came with my parking hat on, not my community safety. Sorry.
Could I email you about it?
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
You.
I will find out.
In terms of the green waste, so we were very mindful of the charges there. It's an important service. However, it is a service area that's seen a significant increase in costs over the last 12, 18 months with fuel prices going up. Obviously, they're starting to come back down, but when we were initially looking at this, they were at record highs. So it is a service that we expect, without going into too technical terms, we don't think the price is very elastic. So in other words, we don't think there will be a big drop in demand for prices going up. I think residents and customers value the service. I think it provides good value for money, and if you compare it to the cost of either driving to a household waste recycling centre or disposing otherwise. So even with the increase in price, we still think it represents value for money, but Cabinet were mindful of how far those prices could be pushed, and we had conversations around that, and we settled it, I think, at a position that reflects that we are still recovering the costs associated with the service, but it will be a service that's still valued by our customers.
And on the car parking, Chris?
Sorry, what was the exact...
Whether do you expect there will be any impact on demand by raising...
I mean, the position at the moment on car parking is that it would maintain it in terms of current levels, because where prices are largely staying the same in real terms. Obviously, we appreciate everyone else's personal income may be squeezed because of the cost of living crisis, but putting that to one side, if you think about the impact of prices just in real terms, it should maintain it. In terms of actually affecting positively or negatively, I think that falls to the outcome of the car parking strategy, when we'll really be looking at which car parks do we want to be directing people to use in terms of managing traffic flow and other sort of more strategic decisions around the use of car parks. And I take your point around ensuring we've got joined up sort of public transport and sort of friendly policy around walking and cycling. I think that really knits in nice with the local plan policy and the work that I think we've already touched on in terms of the local plan CAG. All those things need to be joined at the hip in terms of your parking policy and your local plan policy.
Thank you. Anyone else got any comments or questions on fees and charges? Okay, so we asked if we want to make any recommendations to take forward to Cabinet. Are there any I know you had some things about, but as regard to fees and charges, are there any recommendations? No? Okie dokie. So we'll
just go and get the...
We'll bring the others back in. Okay, so welcome back, Councillor Boyd, Councillor Wing. So moving on to item number 6 on the agenda, Budget 23-24 and 2023-27 medium-term financial plan. So I'm going to call on Mr. Chris Blundell again to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I think most of you probably heard me talk at some length about this budget already, so I'll try and keep it short. I think this is a really positive budget, certainly the most positive budget I've been involved with for a long time in local government. We're putting more money into the budget, considerably more money into the budget, both due to inflationary pressures, but actually investment in services as well. There's no significant savings in terms of impact on staffing, but we've still found ways to make better use of our money through treasury management activities or otherwise. I'm happy to take any questions. I don't propose to go through it in any further detail than that because I think you've all heard it from me already.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So over to members. Do you have any questions or comments you wish to make? Okay. Councillor
Sorry,
Wing,
I've got a few and then a big one. Okay. Let me get my... I really do welcome it. We've got a huge amount of money that I hope is going to maximise benefits for the area. So I think it's really positive that we've got this huge amount of money. I think is it 50,000, Chris? But obviously...
sorry, the capital programme,
yeah,
55 million over 4 years.
55 million, yeah. So it's a huge amount of money. So I think we're all really pleased that amount of money has come into the authority, and congratulations should be given to the officers that actually completed all the extensive paperwork to ensure that we got the funding coming in, and obviously to the people that put this budget together. There's one or two things that I just want to ask questions for. I'm really pleased that there's 800k for repairs and maintenance under 4.13. Do we, and I'll ask them one at a time, do we have priorities for this funding, i.e. which asset, have we already got assets in mind that we need to spend this money on, or is it a case of wait and see what happens?
In terms of prioritisation, so we've commissioned a number of surveys of our properties. Some of our, I think that there's a hit list of our 20 sort of key assets, and then alongside that are surveys for all of our toilets. So good. Once we've got the result of those surveys, we'll start being able to prioritise those projects. We'll also look where possible to capitalise further expenditure, so that may result in coming back to members for further approval, and we'll be looking to do creative things and potentially disposing of some assets to invest in others. So it's all linked to the wider investment in the property team, so it's not just the 800,000 in terms of repairs and maintenance, but it's a big increase in the staffing side of the property team that will allow us to drive rent renewals and lease renewals that should bring in more income to the council, dispose those assets that are surplus to our requirements, and get our corporate asset management plan back up to date, and drive forward what we want to do with all our assets. So sorry that I've gone through that round the houses there and rambled on, but the short answer is no, not at the moment. We don't have a priority list, but we will have it soon.
You've got a plan, which is good. Yeah. The next one is, I'm really pleased that we've got coastal enforcement at 4.14, 5 new posts, which is a great thing, given we've had a huge number of, obviously, complaints about jet skis, one of the things, but also about antisocial behaviour on beaches, litter dropping, etc., etc. What I really want to know is, there'll be 5 new posts. What will their priorities be, and how will they be deployed around the coast? Because obviously I think we've got 19 bays. Some of them are obviously bigger and more popular than others.
I don't know the operational specifics, and I may have she's come with a parking hat on, so and I don't even think it's Penny's area. I think it will sit under Mike Humber. So I think I'm afraid we'll have to get back to you again in terms of prioritisation. I'm not sure how those resources will be used. The only thing I can add is we are charging some of that resource to the DCRIM reserve, which is the earmark reserve that we use for on-street car parking. So we'll be flexible in terms of the resource. That is one of Penny's area. So in the off-season, the winter months, when there's obviously less coastal activity, there's fewer people using the beaches, we will redirect some of those resources to allow us to do further sort of town centre car parking enforcement and other related enforcement activities. But I'm afraid I can't sort of give you any further detail beyond that. The leader may be able to give some further details. Thank you, Ash.
Obviously, this comes under my portfolio. and the discussion is that to be as flexible as we can with these officers, because if you have a rigid structure and beaches and et cetera, that they manage, and it was thought to be wanting them to be more mobile and more fluid, if you like, and take some intelligence of activities that are going on, especially when there are events on, because obviously if there's an event on in one town, then you might need to pull some resources over. So it was thought that it would be more of a, as a team, a flexible team that would be utilised according to the pinch points on the areas to cover the events, but to be more fluid. So if you start to be rigid about this enforcement officer is for that beach, for that beach and this beach, then that becomes very rigid, and that's probably not the way to manage it. So working on intelligence information coming in from our events team and from other instances that we've experienced in the past. We've known that we've had problems on Margate Beach, where there were certain entities of young people coming down on the train, and then they were getting off, they were being stopped at Margate, so then they were getting off at Birchington and Westgate and walking through, and it was all sorts of, so we need to gather the intelligence which is being done, and then that team will be very, very fluid and versatile on what they're operating on. So don't really want to be specific about it, because actually that's probably not the right way to run that sort of team. So that's a discussion that has gone on at the Coast and Foreshores portfolio meeting. So my objective obviously was to get the resource in there, because that's what's been lacking, as you know. So that's hopefully helps explain a little bit about the thought behind it, but it will be managed as it goes forward.
It sounds like a sensible plan. 4.19 was CCTV, so I'm obviously pleased to see more CCTV, and especially as it links with the main concern of our residents. I think just over 50% was feeling safe in our communities. I just want to ask, how does our CCTV system link in with the police system? Because my understanding is, sometimes speaking to our police officers, is they can't access our system, which obviously affects gathering evidence for crime.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anyone else here. Okay, yeah, I thought you might.
I do know the answer to that one. They do have access to it at the control room and at the local police station, and they also can come in to view it. So if they have the right authorisations, they can come in and view, and also if there's been an incident, they can request us to review it and download it and provide it if there is evidence on it. So yes, they have full access.
I will back
to
that
it.
one back to them next time that crops up. Hang on. Obviously, the Margate tidal pool, maybe I should have declared an interest here, because I do swim off the Western Undercliff. It's not the Margate tidal pool, though. And obviously, I see there's a 11k concession going into the Margate tidal pool. What does this mean, and how might it impact on the other users, particularly the large number of sea swimmers? And it's one of the few safe spaces for sea swimmers to swim that use the tidal pool all year round.
My understanding is the pool's not supposed to be used for swimming. The Margate tidal pool is that's one of the reasons we're looking to get a concession arrangement in there, is to allow us to provide lifeguard services to stop people. The lifeguards should stop people using, but also the fact that we've got an operational concession. I'm expecting pedlos and the like. That should, the presence of them alone, I would have thought, should stop people swimming in it as well. So that's the designated use of the tidal pool there. Yeah, Ash, yeah, absolutely.
If you want me to add a fraction to that. So the tidal pool isn't covered by the RNLI lifeguards that look after the main beach. So it's not, it is the tidal pool that is adjacent to the behind the Nayland Rock, well, you know, the Elliott toilets, basically. If you look straight down there on the sun deck, it's that pool there, which is not a swimming, it is not a swimming, it is a tidal pool, but designated by default from a boating pool, because it used to have pedlos, etc. on it. But our main concern is, although it hasn't had a concession on it for a long while, that pool is not covered by the RNI lifeguards. Therefore, we have, as a council, we have a risk element here, which we have to actually solve. So the only way we can solve it is to find the revenue to actually have an own employee lifeguard to look after that pool. Otherwise, we'll have to close the pool, and the only way you can close the pool is to actually open up the back end of it so that it actually, which would be, I'd hate to see that, to actually lose a pool that is of historic value, especially as it got so much coverage in the Empire of Light. I think that maybe that a concession could be found to actually fund having its own independent lifeguard on there. So it would either be enough funds for us to provide some sort of lifeguard cover, or to find a concession that could pay to actually have its own cover there, and we could stipulate the times of cover for that pool. But it is imperative, we cannot have that pool without any attendance of a lifeguard open this summer, because we are at risk. So we have to find a solution for that. And the last thing I want to do is put a bulldozer through the back wall so that it actually is no longer a pool. But it is not a swimming pool, it is actually meant for boating.
So just to confirm, because you know I'm a native of Ramsgate, it's not the Walpole Bay tidal pool. It's the one further
Absolutely
around.
not. No, that's still swimming. And
Okay.
I've got the pictures to prove that on the TV. So yeah.
I want to mention the Ramsgate Levelling Up Fund. It's probably my biggie. And again, we've got 19.4 million, which is good, with 14 million to be spent in this year, according to here. What I also noticed in the document further down is that we have a number of things going on the port and around the harbour, which constitute a further 1.045 million of borrowing to be spent, of which about 700,000 is this 2023-24. The next item, I'm going to mention the next item. The HRA item is absolutely brilliant, because even down to a window being replaced in a building and maintenance of the refurbishment of the tower blocks, it's all there and it's all costed. I don't get the same feeling around the port. So there's a lot of things going on in the port and around the harbour that I don't see properly costed. I also have concerns. I mean, there's 300k to be borrowed to be spent on berth 1. I'd just like to confirm, was berth 1 the berth that had the walkway that collapsed and killed 6 people in 1994? What is that berth presently being used, and what do we intend to use that berth for? It was the walkway on that berth, and the report that came out of that incident wasn't very favourable for 3 main areas, including us running the port. I'd just like to see a bit more detail. I'm very concerned about, our potential to bring in a ferry, but I just want to know that and it says earlier in the documentation that groups have met together and reviewed this and prioritised it, and we've looked at the risk, and we've looked at possible income generation, and clearly with housing, we build a few more houses and there is a direct income coming in. I just want to see a bit more detail, and I do live in Ramsgate, and even some of the things I'm not quite clear what they are. So there's some development on the East Pier, which I'm guessing it's refurbishment of the building that contains the harbour brasserie and the yacht club race hut. Personally, as the Ward Council and also a member of Overview and Scrutiny, I'd like to request that somebody walk me round, or walk us, or the Ward Councillors round the port, so that you can explain what's being done to each building. I'd also like to see the forward modelling. So we're going to obviously repair berth 1. The row berth, I'm not quite sure how much the row berth is going to cost, because there's not a breakdown in that 15 million or 14 million, whatever it was. And then obviously we've got berths 4, 5. We repair 2 berths, we hopefully bring a ferry in, but have we costed the risk to this authority of actually the ongoing forward costs of additional staff staffing, of additional maintenance and additional repair. I'd like to personally see that information, even if it's an estimate and a sort of a best case and worst case scenario going forward. And I'm just not happy that there's enough detail here for me to be happy about the spend of this money.
Thank you, Councillor. You're correct in terms of what's set out in the report. There is, I think it's referred to as the capital team or capital group, which is a group of officers that are primarily members of CMT, but some other specialist officers. So Grant Burton, for example, our capital projects manager, officers that work in ICT and housing, they all get together. Mike Humber's a key member of the group as well, the director responsible for the port, and look through the schemes in detail. There is behind each one of these a proposal, a project, a capital project sort of initiation form. I'm happy to share the details of that with councillors that would like to see them. It supports out the detail that justifies these schemes. Each scheme needs to get above 100 in order to make it onto the capital programme that sort of sets out. There's a variety of different criteria it has to be assessed against, whether there's health and safety implications, whether it's a corporate priority, whether it will generate income, and they score appropriately according to that. So that's the sort of assessment process it goes through. Again, like I said, just to repeat myself, happy to share that with any members that wish to see that in order to get the budget through. In terms of berth 1, my understanding is that's the berth that services the wind farms that are there, so I don't know the exact I don't know the exact layout, but from the proposals forms that I've read and just the general familiarisation I've got with the schemes, I think that's the wind farm one. I'm not sure of the history. I'm afraid that predates me. But yeah, happy to supply that information. I don't know if Ash, this is your portfolio. If there's anything else you'd like to add. Sorry, I'm throwing you under the bus there a bit.
Well, my understanding is one is the wind farm berth. So obviously, we actually generate quite a lot of revenue from the wind farms, so we need to look after the berths on that. Again, endorse the capital programme expenditure. There's very high, well, there's a real strict criteria for a point scoring criteria. I think the 100 points is having looked at it and worked out the criteria, you've got to score on quite a whole wide variety of options and achievements to actually get permission to be granted this expenditure. So testing, yes, the stress test. So I mean, obviously it is a working port, so there's lots of stuff going on all the time. But I'm sure that we can provide breakdowns of it. I mean, although I'm portfolio holder and I meet regularly with Luke and with Mike Humber, and the shadow leader also comes along, as was witnessed when we went on to berth 4-5 onto the actual pontoon, because I actually wanted to believe that it actually was there and installed because of the pain that we've been through to get there. The investment actually on the berths from the levelling up fund is actually 3.5 million, I believe, just under 3.5 million. The testing, obviously, of the believers and the non-believers regarding the port is, well, we'll have to wait and see, but we certainly won't. It's not an election pledge to say that we'll be doing this, we'll be doing that. I mean, there is a great deal of work that has gone on and needs to go on to actually evidence whether or not this is the right thing to do. Certainly, as a leader, I'm not one to make decisions from the heart. They definitely make from the head, and I take strict, pay strict attention to the officers and to the experts in this field. But I always believed in the airport, and I am probably the same stance on the port, whereas I believe it is a port. And as the Cabinet made a statement earlier well, actually it wasn't earlier this year, was it? It was late last year that we believed that was the path that we wanted to follow. So, but the proof will be in the pudding. We will listen to the experts and go from there. But I'm sure Chris can release information that is prevalent to the back up the capital expenditure that is shown in the budget.
Could I just request a visit to the port, because the concern over berth 1 came from a number of residents, so clearly a number of residents think berth 1 is the old berth that collapsed, the walkway that collapsed. If the ward councillors get a better idea of exactly which berth is which, then we can back some of this information back. And it would be nice, there are some things there that I don't recognise the names of the buildings, and we have, you know, it's on our patch, it's our ward, we've got a genuine interest. I hope I hope we get a ferry, I'll be the first one to buy a ticket, but that, well, I hope we get a ferry, I hope it's a Sally line, that's my link to Ramsgate and Thanet. But it, you know, and it doesn't mean I'm not here to support it. I'm here to, that overview and scrutiny is about asking questions and making sure money is being appropriately spent, and that's what I think we should do.
If I may, Chair, yeah, I'll speak with Mike Humber and we'll see what we can do on that. Obviously, it's a very controlled area and it is a working port, so you know it'd have to be sensibly handled. But high vis, hard hats, and hard boots, and I've got all the gear. Anyway, I'll have a word with Mike and see what he feels about it, and maybe raise. I wouldn't recommend we do it actually right this moment because it's blooming freezing out there. We'll try and pick a nice day.
Are you? Thank you, Councillor Ring. I think we all live in hope for the port. I think the heady days of smorgasbord and booze cruises need to come back. Councillor Austin.
I wanted obviously to pick up on a couple of things that Councillor Wing said. Particularly, it's really welcome to hear how the process has been, Chris, and I wish we'd known that before. We've been asking for business plans around the levelling up stuff for Ramsgate since it first came in, and we've seen nothing. So it's really good to know that that's going to be available to us, and we're going to be able to see how these things have been scored, how the planning has gone, and it would have been nice to have had more information earlier, but it's great to have it now. Just a couple of things on the port and going from the major to the minor. You heard me say at the CAG, and you've heard me say since, why are we not using in the short term the bits of land on the port that are not at the moment earmarked for anything, for things like camper van storage, large storage containers, etc. We know we've got a waiting list for those. Why are we not capitalising on that now? Even if it's only a 6-month arrangement, it wouldn't be a massive money spinner, but it would be helpful. It seems to me silly that we're not considering doing that when we've got those areas. We sat here with Mike Humber's presentation with the lovely plans with lilac circled areas. I went back to my slides to try to find it, in fact, but I can't find a copy of it. But there are certainly big areas of the port that at the moment I understand we're not doing anything with. I know you said there might be stuff coming through, but it's a question, I think, of when stuff's coming through. And again, about us knowing that with the ward councillors, we should know it. So there's something else I want to say, but I know you want to come back on that, Chris.
Yeah, just in terms of that, I know Mike Humber, the director that's responsible for service, is always actively looking at opportunities, but Mike's got a really large sort of remit at the moment in terms of the level of resources. I think this is sort of reflective of the number of sort of senior managers that we've had available in the organisation for the best part of a year, really. But I'm hoping the long term will become the short term pretty soon in terms of the port and what we're looking at, and we'll be able to bring to councillors sooner rather than later. But in terms of the immediacy, I know we've looked at various different things, whether it be car storage with the Jeffco shipments and various other sort of opportunities as they are presented to us. But we're also very mindful of not tying our hands, because a lot of these will have that they'll want a certain length of time with contractual commitments, and we don't want to sort of restrict what we can do in the long term with the port. So it is a bit of a balancing act.
Thank you. Yes, and I think that's why I was suggesting things like container storage and whatever, because obviously it's much more within our own control. What you actually said about Mike and being, you know, having so many responsibilities actually leads on to my other comment, which is it's really good to see this budget, A, not having any compulsory redundancies, but B, the investment in staffing, because we've been acutely aware as councillors how massively overstretched so many officers have been and how difficult it has been for them to respond to all the priorities that they had, let alone respond to our questions or you know, information that we wanted from them. On that, can you just clarify for me 4.37 about no, it's not. It's the one above. 4.36 salary void target. Why have we got a target in respect of that? Because it seems to me to cut against what we're trying to do elsewhere. Or have I misunderstood what that's about?
So salary void targets is that we know throughout the year some posts will become vacant, and unfortunately it usually takes us a longer period of time to recruit that post than it does in terms of the notice period that the officer has to serve. So typically, say someone will say, thanks very much, but I'm going somewhere else. They may have a 1, 2 or 3 month notice period. The manager will try to kickstart recruitment immediately. However, you've got to advertise, you've got to interview, and then you've got to select. That will take a length of time in itself. Even then, when you've told the successful applicant, they'll go, great, I'm now going to hand my notice in. So you say for a post that's got a 1 month notice period, you're probably looking at, I don't know, 2 month void, 2, 3 month void. Yeah, so you're carrying, we always know we're going to carry some vacancy in our budgets anyway. So if we didn't put in that, we'd be over budgeting for. So we've seen that we've been hitting our targets quite comfortably, so we've put some extra money on top of that just because of turnover and staff as much as anything. So it's not that it doesn't restrict our establishment any further in terms of what we're doing. It's just reflecting the reality of what we spend because of those times that we've got vacant posts.
Okay, thank you. My concern was that it might be we're going to have a moratorium of 3 months. So that I've worked in an organisation like that, and trying to pick up somebody else's work 3 months later, just you waste so much time. It's actually not a saving.
No, I have as well, and you tend to get situations like that come in mid-year when there are particular budget issues that you can't address through other management action, and you go, it's the obvious one, right? No recruitment on vacant posts until we've got. It is difficult for staff, but it's not an easy option. It's not something we like to do, but it's one that when things are difficult and we need to balance the budget in year, that we do look to consider.
In terms of service efficiency, I can't see. It would be the last thing I would want to recommend.
It is,
unless we were
and
absolutely
sometimes it can be self-defeating because there are some services that you've got to the staff. So we wouldn't do that, say, in frontline services like waste collection and street cleansing. You'd have to bring agency staff in, and some other services you'd end up making them exempt from anyway for sort of homelessness, for example. We have a statutory duty, we have to provide a certain level. So we'd look at it a case-by-case basis anyway, but it's not a situation anyone ever wants to be in.
No, that's great, thank you. And congratulations on those staffing aspects in particular, but on the budget generally.
I mean, just to build on that, you may have seen, I believe it's published yesterday, a report that's going to General Purposes Committee next Monday in terms of the restructure of the corporate management team. The funding for that is all reflected in this budget. The actual implications are set out in the report, but there's not a concern that approving that report on Monday kiboshes this budget. It's all self-contained. It's manageable.
Just to correct Chris, and I don't normally have to do that, but in my diary, it's actually on Tuesday, so don't turn up on Monday.
My apologies.
Okay, is there any more questions or comments? Councillor Keane.
Yeah, just one thing I've just noticed, and that's reading about the Margate Town deal, and it says about initiatives including Creative Lands Trust, etc., etc. Doesn't mention anything about the development at Walpole Bay. Now, I know it only says including. I'm just checking that that hasn't been shelved at all.
Not to my knowledge, and I certainly don't want to set the cat amongst the pigeons. That the only thing I will caveat with the Margate Town deal is obviously there's high inflation in construction at the moment, and as the schemes are progressed, there may be the need to manage the programmes in terms of scaling some of them back. It's not my understanding that's been done at all, so I don't want to worry anyone at this moment in time. I'm just putting a sort of a health warning on this one. All those sort of capital programmes, when we scaled them up initially, were based on a different environment in terms of construction costs, and there's been no further government funding that's been provided to meet that shortfall in terms of inflation. So officers are working really, really hard to scale the projects as much as they can and meet the initial brief. But obviously, if that is if that does come to pass, there's various levels of governance that are associated with either the Margate Town deal or the levelling up scheme, so they would go through those appropriate stages. So there's the board, town deal board, that would have to approve that, and it would come back to council and cabinet to review and approve the revised schemes. It's not something our officers will do in isolation, but we are on our risk register with those schemes. Construction and inflation costs is right at the top. It's the highest risk.
Okay, anyone else? Oh, Councillor Yates.
It wasn't a just comment, it was a recommendation, so.
Right, I was going to come to that. So if there's no more questions or comments, we are asked if we want to take any recommendations back to Cabinet. So it's your time.
Thank you, Chair. So at a recent climate change cabinet advisory group, officers informed members, and as I was a member of this group, this is what we heard, that there's an increased demand being placed on home energy service. This small team of 2 officers have provided invaluable expert service to our residents during these most challenging of times. So following this, I've worked closely with officers to present a proposal for members to consider tonight for recommendation. And this is recommendation to Cabinet for inclusion in this year's budget, or next year's budget. So I'm proposing that we introduce a 3rd officer to the home energy service who will provide a cold buster service. And this will be for private rented households. And in practice, what this means is that we have an officer available who can visit low-income homes in the district, and that officer will then help to install low-cost measures such as power-down devices on plugs, radiator foils behind radiators, LED bulbs, carbon monoxide alarms, draft proofing, chimney balloons, making adjustments to hot water and heating temperatures, and demonstrate smart metering. So officers have advised that the cost of providing this service would be £35,000 per year, and this can be fully funded from our existing Better Care fund allocation. So therefore, there will not be a need to find a general fund budget saving to fund this. So the recommendation is for a 3rd officer to the home energy service at a cost of £35,000, funded from the Better Care fund allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Giles has made a note of that for you. So that's your vote. Yeah, Councillor Coe to second that. Yeah. Did somebody one of the officers want to come back on that?
Thank you. I thought it might be worth just adding a little bit of context. So the Better Care Fund is an annual allocation from central government that we receive that pays for a range of different things under our housing assistance policy, which is a document that's published on the council's website. The primary function of the Better Care Fund is to pay for mandatory disabled facilities grants, and we spend something like about £3 million a year on mandatory disabled facilities grants. That housing assistance policy also sets out a number of other schemes that we fund with that money, including the existing energy efficiency officers, but we also fund occupational therapy services to help speed the process of applying for a disabled facilities grant. We fund handyman services, and we fund a hospital discharge service to help people who are coming out of hospital but need some adaptations in their home before they are able to return home. So it's funding quite a wide range of issues. I think Councillor Yates is right in saying that there is potentially capacity within that money to add to that portfolio of services and maybe do some more on energy efficiency. But it needs to be in the context of a review of the whole of the Better Care Fund allocations. So I think what I'd quite like to suggest is that we bring a report that sets out where we are with our Better Care Fund allocations, what we expect to have to spend on mandatory grants, and what else is available for other services, of which this is clearly an area that you might want to support, but there may be other things that you also want to support in that kind of general broad range of services that we provide with that money.
So does that give you hope, Councillor Yates?
Try another button. There we go. That's an interesting one. So from our side, we are making this proposal because we believe the time is now. We are in an incredibly tough energy crisis at the moment. I've got residents who are telling me they're paying £400 a month on electricity, on their energy and gas. And now is the time to do this. And I think if we start it now, then actually this scheme could well expand as we prove the service, having TDC staff going into our most vulnerable resident homes and installing measures that they can see, and they don't need to own their home to have these measures put in. And yeah, we have worked with officers on this scheme, so it is a scheme that has been kind of worked on with officers, as the shadow group are allowed to work with officers to develop an alternative budget, and this is our alternative budget proposal, which we would like members of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel to recommend tonight. Obviously, the recommendation tonight doesn't finish this discussion. It goes back to Cabinet and then to full Council. So I think some work, potentially, my counter would be, well, some work can happen between now and Cabinet to have a look at those further ideas, but I would still recommend that this is done because considering the price of energy at the moment, there's never been a better time to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Okay, so what do other members of the panel think about that recommendation? Councillor Wing?
Having listened to Bob Porter, I'm a bit concerned about, could this have an impact on an area of funding for people with disability? Also, does your funding actually include the cost of the installation, the light bulbs? Is it just a staffing cost? I totally support the proposal, but I think it would be better to receive some sort of report from Bob Porter on the exact nature of the money available, and if all of the money isn't available, the possible impact on another group of vulnerable residents, people with disabilities. So I support it, but I need more information on the possible impact on other areas of the funding.
Anyone else? Yeah, go for it.
Just to say, the 35k is not just for the labour, so £28,000 is the labour, and then £7,000 is for the equipment. So that has been taken into account. It wasn't my understanding that this would have any impact on the existing, on the provision of different services, because I think some officers' time is actually being reduced, and there's a gap there that can help fund this. But from my understanding, this wasn't going to impact other services. Obviously, I take what the officers said tonight, but I still think if we agree it, this doesn't mean, this isn't full council, this is just taking it to the next step, and then we can again take the look at this between now and the council. But I'd prefer to push this forward now and then have a further discussion at Cabinet and Council if more information can be provided, which counters what I've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So is anybody against taking that recommendation forward?
Chair, if I may. The benefit we have with this is that given that it's externally funded, it doesn't necessarily need to be approved as part of the budget setting cycle. Appreciate that Councillor Yates is setting out the Labour Group's position here in terms of a budget amendment. It can be taken forward as part of the budget, but also because the funding is there, we don't necessarily need to go through the same full council approval steps, so it could be dealt with via OSP and just Cabinet to approve the expenditure as opposed to council needing to approve an overall increase in the budget. Sorry, that probably complicates matters rather than simplifies them. But ultimately what I'm saying is the decision doesn't need to be taken right now by OSP if they do not wish to. There's still opportunities to do so. But equally, Councillor Yates and other councillors still have the opportunity to make amendments to the budget as part of the budget setting process at full council in February as well.
Yeah, I think that clarifies it. So we've taken that recommendation forward to Cabinet, and Charles has got it all written down. Yeah, I asked if anybody did not agree with it, and nobody. So is everybody in support of that recommendation? Yeah, everyone's in support. Was there any more recommendations anybody want to make? No? Okay, so we move on to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the HRA budget. So 2023-24. So I'll call on again, because it's Mr. Blundell, yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
It's your night.
It is indeed, but I probably will lean on Mr. Porter quite heavily for this one because him and his team have done quite a lot of work on this. So the key decision I think around the HRA is where rents are going to sit. That's the challenging issue. A lot of the other items in the budget reports for the HRA, there's not too much room for manoeuvre. There are lots of pressures on the budget in terms of energy costs. I think the report sets out as 50% increase in energy costs. There's other inflation-linked pressures that we've got. Lots of our contracts, repairs and maintenance and otherwise are seeing CPI or RPI-linked increases. The other pressure, I'm sure Mr. Porter can talk to it at far more detail and with greater knowledge of the subject than I can, is the waking watch pressures that we're seeing next year. So in terms of the framework that we've got for setting rents this year, it is different to previous years. Usually with rents, they're allowed to be increased by CPI plus 1%. That's the limit that we're set. With inflation, obviously at very high historic levels, we've had a different set of parameters put in place. The government consulted on what the limits should be this year. Their options were 3%, 5% or 7%, and they've actually allowed us to increase rents up to 7%. That's for both social and affordable rents. We are presenting a 7% increase. That's largely because the HRA still is in deficit. So if you look at the bottom line for the HRA, there's still a significant deficit that we need to recover. We're assuming that we return to the CPI plus 1% next year, and that would be looking at rent increases that possibly could be in double digits. And those rental increases are fundamental to getting the HRA back into surplus. Without doing that, we end up in a situation where we end up below our recommended minimum balances in a pretty short order. That probably is just stuff that sounds like accounting sort of gumph to you, but the fundamental thing in practical terms that will stop us from doing is delivering the number of new homes that we want to, because the rental increases underwrite housing delivery in terms of building new homes. We need those income streams there. The more income that we've got allows us to build a greater number of homes. So that obviously is the tricky issue to square. Do you increase rents in order to generate sufficient income to get the HRA back into surplus, and also to finance our, what I would say is really ambitious house building programme to get more affordable homes into the district? The other thing to bear in mind in terms of the rental increases is that a large majority of our tenants, 75%, are in receipt of some form of either housing benefit or universal credit that will go towards paying for this increase. So when the rents increase, the amount that they can recover through the universal credit or the housing benefit is increased as well. So we have a policy in place for our affordable homes that they are all below the local housing allowance rate, which sets the amount of housing benefit or universal credit that can be recovered, or 80% of the private sector market rents, to give you an idea of how we're trying to pitch rents and ensure that they're still affordable. They'll all still be within that policy framework, even the affordable properties. If we were to apply a 7% increase across all of them, there would be 10 properties that would go above that threshold. So what we do is we cap them so that those properties, those 10, won't actually see the full 7% increase. They'll see a relatively lower increase that takes them up to that threshold, so that if they are eligible for support with their housing costs, they're still able to recover that through universal credit or through housing benefit. Those were the sort of main points I wanted to set out. I think the key thing for me is to stress the importance of the rental increases to ensure the financial sustainability and robustness of the HRA. We're still catching up with the rental reductions that we had to have in place from 2016 to 2020. For 4 years in a row, we had to reduce rents by 1%. So that resulted in a cumulative almost 5% reduction in rents, when at the same time inflation was going up, so our costs were going up, which put a lot of strain on the HRA and really is the reason why we are in deficit now. That wasn't what our business plan was anticipating at that moment in time. But it's probably best if I stop talking and hand over to Mr. Porter, who hopefully won't be the expert in the room on these matters.
Well, I think Chris has been quite modest, because I'm not sure he's left me an awful lot to say. I mean, Chris is absolutely right that the big pressure this year is from inflation, and we all know inflation is running very high, and a lot of the costs in the HRA are inflation linked. So all of the contracts, including our main responsive repairs contract, is inflation linked, and where we've got communal services that we're providing, particularly communal heating, they're subject to very high fuel cost increases as well, the same as everybody else. So there are real pressures from inflation within the business plan this time round. The other, I guess, significant growth item in this agenda in revenue terms is, and Chris did refer to it, is the Waking Watch provision. So we've had a Waking Watch provision in the budget for more than a year now, providing 24-hour on-site officers at each of our 5 tower blocks with external wall insulation. The reason that we have that in place is a result of the fire risk assessments for those buildings, and we've been working on the installation of new alarm systems and new fire strategies with our external fire risk assessors and with the fire service to move to a point when we don't need to have a Waking Watch in place. There's only 2 routes for us to get to that point. One is sounder alarms in every single flat, and what they call a simultaneous evacuation strategy. So if the fire alarm sounds, it sounds in everybody's flat, and we effect an evacuation of the building. And we are installing those alarms, and we've pretty much completed it, but there are a handful of tenants in each block that won't let us in to do that work. So we're having to go through injunction procedures with the court to get into those flats to fit those alarms. The only other way to get to a point where we can stand that down, of course, is to remove and replace the external wall insulation. And you will have seen, I think in your last meeting, proposals related to the refurbishment of tower blocks including funding from government for the removal and replacement of external wall insulation, and our bid to the Social Housing Decarb Fund for upgrading the energy efficiency of those blocks as well. So that money is in this capital budget to deliver those programmes. I do want to stress the complexity of those programmes, but we have programmed it over 2023, 24 and 24, 25. And obviously once those are, if we aren't able to get into every flat to install alarms, once we've completed those programmes, we'll be able to stand down those waking watch services. I suppose as a footnote to all of that, we have seen, as well as helping to maintain safety standards for residents in those blocks, we've seen some other benefits from having 24-hour on-site staff in terms of being able to deal with fly tipping and rubbish in the stairways, dealing with antisocial behaviour, collecting evidence, and just generally creating a feeling of security for residents in those buildings. We've definitely seen some benefits. And of course, last year we also increased our own employees that are dedicated to the tower blocks and recruited 2 additional housing response officers dedicated to the tower blocks to deal with some of those issues as well. So all of that is wrapped up in this budget proposal and adds a bit of pressure to the revenue account. And as Mr. Blundell says, getting the balances, getting the account back into a surplus year on year is really critical for the long-term viability of the housing stock and the business plan. I think the only other thing I really would want to highlight is the capital programme, the fact that we've got the amount of reserve we've got in the business plan means that we are able to deliver some really quite ambitious capital programmes, including all the money for the tower blocks, but also substantial allocations of capital funding for our new build programme. And the schemes that we've already delivered and the ones that we're progressing at the moment through design stage with allocated funding will mean that since 2015 we will have delivered over 200 new homes, and I think that is really quite a fantastic achievement for an authority of our size. And to be able to continue to put over £8 million a year into new build over the next 7, 8, 9 year period, I think is something we should be really proud of. So I think they're the main points I wanted to make, but obviously if there's any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you. Right, over to members. Any questions and comments you'd like to make? Councillor Huxley.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Bob. Just to say, in page 136 of your annex, the HRA capital programme, point 4.1, so 23-24, 24-25 capital programmes include an additional £150,000 budget to install wooden windows across a number of sites. That's interesting. Why wooden? Are they double glazed? Is it to do with zero net carbon policy of TDC?
Well, I can answer that quite easily. They're in conservation areas.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So it'd be in listed buildings that are owned by TDC. So it would be housing.
Well, not necessarily listed. Some of them, we do have some listed buildings, but generally it's because they're in conservation areas.
You tell which sites, or was it sort of?
Oh, now you're testing me. I don't know. I can get you a list if
Doesn't
you
matter.
if you want me to.
That's right. Thanks.
Anyone else? Councillor Wing.
I'd like to say thank you to the housing team, especially since we moved from East Kent Housing. So, I think I had 1.5 years as a councillor under the East Kent Housing regime, and then moving to us taking it back in-house. And as a ward councillor, I've had significantly lower concerns with housing. Harbour Towers sits in my ward. And I was going to ask you about the sort of associated benefits of having the Waking Watch, because I know that a significant number of residents in Harbour Towers really appreciate the Waking Watch being there. And I think they'd be quite upset to see it go, because I think it does offer them security, and I suspect in the other two towers where maybe there's a bit more antisocial behaviour, it's probably gone a hell of a way to dealing with some of that antisocial behaviours. Is that something we can review to keep, or find additional funding to keep the Waking Watch? But I'd just like to say thank you to the housing team, all of them, that the homeless, we seem to have less homeless people on our streets. The ones that we do have seem to be the entrenched ones that are difficult to reach. So I do feel that we're moving in the right direction in an area of council work which is really difficult. So thank you.
Anyone else? Looks like a no. So we're asked if we want to make any recommendations, so I presume there's none to make. Excellent. Okey-dokey, making it nice and easy for me. Right, item 8 on the agenda is the review of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel work programme for 2022-23. So do any members any comments to make on the work programme? Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to update members regarding the TDC and Parish and Town Council's collaboration working party. Following last year's meetings with officers, the Cabinet and Parish and Town clerks, Charles has put together a draft of our recommendations, and these will be shortly sent to working party members. And the final report will be presented to the panel in the first quarter of this year. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Curry. Anyone else? No? Okay, then we're asked to note the report. Noted. Moving on to the last item on the agenda, the forward plan and exempt cabinet report list. Unless there's something from the plan that the panel wish to discuss or consider, then the members are asked to notice the report. Noted. And that brings us to the end of the meeting, so I'd like to thank officers and members of the Cabinet and members of the Council for coming this evening. Thank you. And thanks for making it easy for me. Thank you.